Okay, Eisenberg kids, this is your reading lesson for May 11th. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about main idea with fiction. So, when we're talking about a make believe text, um, you're, there is still a way to focus on what the text is mostly about, even though it's a made up story. But our strategies look a little bit different for that. Okay, so great readers can tell the main idea of any text, and that includes fiction. It's just some of the words that we use and the strategies we use are a little different. So I'm going to go ahead, make sure that you have your document for today pulled up, and it should say main idea with fiction up at the top. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start with this first paragraph. In order to think about the main idea of a fiction text, we need to think about the elements or parts of the plot. The elements of plot are the basic parts that every fiction story will have: characters, setting, problem, and solution. Some stories may also have a theme, a moral or lesson that you should recognize when you think of what the story is mostly about. So I'm going to stop there. So some important words that you need to know are elements of plot. So remember that word elements just means parts. It's a fancy word for parts. And plot is just the basic sequence of a story. So elements of plot are just the basic parts of a story, and those are character, setting, problem, solution. We've talked about that. You've learned about that since you were in first grade, maybe even kindergarten. And then a lot of fiction stories are told in order to teach a lesson, which means we also want to be on the lookout for theme. Not every fiction story will have a theme, but most of them have some kind of lesson that you could learn built in, even if that wasn't their purpose. So it's always good to be on the lookout for that. All right, we're going to continue with the next paragraph. We can use a graphic organizer like the one below to keep track of the elements of plot as we read a fiction text. All right, so here's a little brief review of what those elements are. So remember, characters are who is in the story. Setting is where and when the story happens. Problem is something that goes wrong or something that is difficult for one of the main characters in the story. And then a solution is however they solve that problem or fix that problem, or however they get whatever gets them through the hard thing. And then we've already reviewed that a theme is the lesson that the author wants you to learn about life from what happens to the characters in the story. So today, let's continue with this next part. When you put these elements together into a sentence or two, it creates a summary. A summary tells the main idea of a fiction text by describing the elements of plot in a short way. Okay, so a summary is just the short version, guys. Read the passage below and fill in the graphic organizer. Use the information in your graphic organizer to write one or two sentences to summarize what this story is mostly about. So that's the key to summarizing. You cannot have all of the details in the story. So practicing summaries really helps our brain to focus on just the most important information. And that's what the main idea is all about. It's the most important parts of the story, what the story was about most of the time. Okay. All right, so I'm going to read this story. As I read, I'll kind of stop and think aloud for you, and I'm going to be focusing my brain and looking for those elements of plot: character, setting, problem, solution, and then at the end, I'm going to see if there's some kind of theme in there, okay? So you're going to hear me stop and think about when I see those things pop up in the story. All right, let's start with paragraph 1. Jody walked home from school on Friday only to find that the door was locked and nobody was home. I'm already going to stop and think for a second because my brain just alerted me that I've found a character. So far, the story is about Jody, and my brain already has recognized something that might be a problem. Jody's locked out of her house, and I know that if I were a kid and I couldn't get into my house, that could be a difficult situation for me. So I'm wondering, maybe this is going to be the problem of the story. So let's keep reading. Usually, I'm right here in case you have lost your spot. Usually, Jody had a key with her, but last week she had loaned her key to her brother because he lost his. She was forgotten to get it back from him. Her mom always worked late on Fridays. If she couldn't figure out a way into her house, she'd be trapped outside until her brother was done with band practice. All right, guys, so this really does seem to be the problem of the story, is that Jody is locked out of her house because she doesn't have her keys with her. And it seems like this is going to be a problem because there's no one else home. Let's continue. So we have our character, and we do have our setting. Think about it. Where is she right now? If she's locked out of her house, where would she be? She's standing outside of her house, right? So that would be the setting of the story. So we have Jody, who's standing outside of her house because the door is locked and she doesn't have any way to get in. All right, so if we've found the characters with the setting and the problem, what do we need to be on the lookout for now? The solution, for sure. And we also want to keep a lookout in case any more problems pop up, because sometimes there's more than one. So let's keep going. We are right here at the beginning of paragraph 2. Jody climbed over the fence into her backyard, hoping that the back door was unlocked. It wasn't. Then she tried climbing through the doggy door, but it was way too small for her. Their chihuahua was tiny, only 5 pounds. Paragraph 3. Walking around the perimeter of the house, Jody tried to open all of the windows, hoping that she would be able to crawl through one of them. Every single one of them was locked. She wondered how angry her mom would be if she broke one of the windows. She picked up a rock, planning on throwing it at her bedroom window, and then changed her mind last minute. In my head, I'm thinking that was a smart choice, Jody. Not worth breaking a window, right? Aren't there other things she could try first? That was just what was happening in my head. All right, we are on the next paragraph. Pulling out her cell phone, Jody texted her mom and her brother. She told them she was locked out and begged them to come home early if they could. She knew that neither of them would have much free time to check their phones in the next couple hours, but it was worth a shot. Okay, I'm going to pause here because I'm thinking, okay, so she has a cell phone, so this shouldn't be so bad, right? Maybe her making this phone call is going to lead to the solution. She hasn't solved her problem yet, but it seems like we're on our way. So let's keep going. Next paragraph. Out of ideas, Jody walked dejectedly, that means sadly, back to the front of her house. She sat down on her front porch steps and pulled her math homework out of her backpack. She figured she could finish it while she waited for her brother to get home. As she was beginning the second problem, Mrs. Blanche, her neighbor, wandered over. "What are you doing out there?" Mrs. Blanche asked. "Did you get locked out? Your mom gave me an extra key if you need me to unlock the door for you." "Yes, thank you," Jody replied. "I thought I was going to be stuck out here for hours." Mrs. Blanche unlocked the door, and Jody gratefully gave her a hug and ran inside. She wouldn't be stuck outside all afternoon after all. Okay, so it seems like this was the solution, right? So she solved her problem, finally, of being locked out, not from calling like we thought was going to happen, but because Mrs. Blanche had a spare key. All right, so let's check our understanding and make sure we remember what we read. So the characters in the story, I would say Jody, and I would also add Mrs. Blanche because she became an important person in the story once we got to the end, right? She was part of the solution. All right, so the setting, the entire story takes place in the same spot. Yeah, enter down here. All right, make my text a little bit bigger so it's easier for you to see. There we go. All right, so the setting was outside Jody's house. And the problem in the story is Jody is locked out of her house. And how does she solve that problem? What was the solution to the story? Her neighbor, Mrs. Blanche, had a spare key and let her in. All right, so let's think. Do you think there's a lesson in this story? What do you think maybe Jody learned from her problem that we could kind of apply as a warning or advice for our life? So I was thinking, if she was locked out because she forgot her keys, then maybe the lesson would be responsible for yourself, right? Because if she had remembered her keys, then none of this would have been a problem. Or maybe it could be a positive lesson, like there are always good people around to help you, right? Because we have her neighbor showing up and helping her out. Okay, so either of those could be a theme for this story, and you would type that there. All right, so now we're going to use these pieces to put together a summary. So a summary is just the basics of what a story is mostly about in just one or two sentences. So we're going to use what we filled in here in order to write our summary. So watch what I do. I'm going to start by saying this text was mostly about, just like we do when we're starting an answer about main idea for nonfiction. So I'm going to say this text was mostly about, or I could say this story was mostly about, and then I'm going to start here. A girl named Jody. Now, notice I didn't say Mrs. Blanche yet, right? Because she didn't show up until the very end, so I shouldn't mention her until the end of my summary, right? We want to keep it in order. So I could say it's about a girl named Jody who is locked outside of her house, because that covers the setting and the problem, right? So Jody, a girl named Jody, locked outside of her house, period. The story ends when her neighbor, Mrs. Blanche, uses a spare key to let her in. Okay, so 2 sentences, I just summarized this story. So we're going to go down here and we're going to type in complete sentences. We are going to make sure we have a capital letter and a period, all that good stuff, because we are writing a response. Okay, so character in the story. This story is mostly about a girl named Jody. So there's our character, who is locked outside. So I put that outside in there to give a hint about the setting. Who is locked outside her house. Okay. So there's my problem too, because she was locked out. So now I can start my second sentence, and now I have to tell about the solution, and I can mention any theme that I thought would fit this story. So her problem is solved when her neighbor, Mrs. Blanche, uses a spare key to let her in. Okay. All right. So that's my summary. That's it. So the great thing about a summary is it's short. You have to sum up the story in just 1 or 2, or maybe if it's a really, really long text, you could have maybe 3 to 4 sentences, but super short. All right. Go to Edge Elastic and get your practice in. Be sure to submit when you're done.